Good afternoon or good evening. Thank you for joining me.
Good evening. Thank you for asking me.
You're you're very well known, whether it's retail or business in general, and certainly in the arena of entrepreneurship. And I thought the journey, and I've heard you speak. I heard you speak brilliantly in Birmingham, and I thought your journey was so amazing. I thought the new bunch of entrepreneurs, and even those who've been in the game a while, would be intrigued on how you grew and scaled the business, how by simply some of the words you said, it collapsed, but then amazingly, how you recovered and built a multi-million pound business again. And that I think is quite a journey. So if you don't mind, that's the route I'm going to take. So my first question really, I suppose, is my guess is you grew up, because you took it over from your father, you grew up in very much an entrepreneurial environment. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, my parents were always talking shop. My father had, I don't really remember, till he had about 6 shops, because at that point, he was taking me round the shops on a Friday during my school holidays. So he always involved me in the business, even though I was 8 or 9 years old. He took me round to those 6 shops, which were Clapham Junction, Richmond, which was the first one, Slough, High Wycombe, St Albans and Luton. So I remember the 6 that it was, and he took me round there. So I was always interested in the business, and him and my mother were always talking about it. And he was in business with his brothers, who he didn't get on with very well at all, and his father. So it was a typical sort of family business where they were always arguing. But I was listening. I'm always a good listener, and I was always sitting in the car, eavesdropping on their conversation.
And do you think that's where you did a lot of your learning, the whole entrepreneurship thing, by just simply being so young and learning some of those skill sets without having, I don't know, did you do an MBA or did you go to business school? I assume.
No, I didn't do anything like that. I hardly went to school. I went to a prep school, which I did. I just about scraped through to get my 11 plus. But there were about 15 people in the class, 12 or 15, but we were segregated in different groups, and there was just 6 of us really that were taking 11 plus. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was borderline pass. But you used to give 3 choices. My first choice was Hendon County Grammar, which I lived in Hendon. It was just so I only found this out at a later date, that apparently I was such a borderline, and the headmaster argued that I should be, I don't know why, that I should be taken on, whereas the rest of this is what he said to me later, where the rest of the board didn't want me to come on, but he argued that I should. I don't know why, he never met me. But he told me all that when he expelled me, that how disappointed he was, that he made a stand for me against his colleagues, and I let him down because I'd come last 2 years running. But then again, it wasn't 6 people in the class in the grammar school, it was 33 people in the class. And I really didn't absorb anything that was going on. I mean, I'm sure I had some sort of, they'd call it something or other today, I don't know what, but there was nothing in those days. Nobody diagnosed anyone with any problems. Well, not that I've had any problems since, but I obviously couldn't concentrate on it, or I wasn't interested. But my father was very ill at the time, and I was worried about that because he'd had a brain tumour. But I don't know whether that was an excuse or not. But anyway, the bottom line was I got expelled for being stupid, basically, which they wouldn't do that to you today.
But so it's interesting. So obviously you learned a hell of a lot, weekends and going in after, and then of course, so for you, was it quite a natural thing to go into the family business?
Oh, completely natural. After being expelled, my father sent me to some school which was called a crammer, where you had to learn everything you didn't learn in a very short space of time with intensive training. So you used to go into different, you could choose. This was fantastic for me because there was no discipline involved. You could decide whether to go to this lecture or that lecture, or, you know, like a university setup.
Yeah.
And of course, what did I do? I didn't go to any lecture. I went to the betting shop. So I didn't achieve anything there, surprisingly. I gambled all the time. And when I wasn't in the betting shop, I was gambling with the other students, playing sort of cards. And we played this game as odds and evens with coins. Anyway, so my father said, this is hopeless. You might as well, it's 15, you might as well come into the business now. That's what you've always wanted to, because, you know, you're not, you didn't say you're a hopeless case, but you're not learning anything. So there's no point. You're not going to learn anything. So don't come into the business, which I did. And I went in and I loved it. I went in just as a shop assistant in Wood Green. And then they were worried, the manager and the assistant were worried about me coming along, that I was going to be sort of highfalutin and all that. But as soon as I arrived, I started talking about the horses, and we, from then on, we got on very well. And I went around the betting shop there as well. So I didn't do it. I wasn't really working particularly hard when I started working.
And so you started at the bottom, and then when did it become apparent to you? Because then you took over, and I'm interested in how you took over from your father, because it's quite an interesting transition itself. And when you did take the top seat, yeah, what did you think you could do to improve it? Because you clearly saw, once you'd taken over a big, how easy was it to take over from your father?
Well, that you are absolutely right. He had this brain tumor, and which was getting worse, and it changed his personality from being somebody who was really pleasant and caring. He was short-tempered and irrational and making ridiculous decisions, and the business started suffering. You know, the business really, he was brilliant in the early days, and that's why he'd managed now to build up to about 100 stores. But he was totally losing his way. He was losing the plot, and he became paranoid. And it just, you know, it's very sad, you know, to see the change in him. But I could see that the writing was on the wall, because we'd gone into loss, 34,000 loss. And then we discovered, it was a public company, that H. Samuel, the biggest jewellers in the country, had bought 20% of our shares, which could only mean one thing: they were about to bid. They'd already bought James Walker, which was the second largest jewellers. And I can assure you, when H. Samuel would buy us, the first person to be fired would be me, the boss's son. So I was getting, I could see, and I had a mortgage and stuff like that. I mean, you know, people seem to think that, you know, if you're the son of somebody who's got 100 shops, you're very wealthy and stuff like that. But it wasn't really like that. I was earning about 5,000 a year or 7,000 a year or something. And my father never gave me special treatment. You know, I was like, by now I'd moved to Oxford Street, and I was like the gopher going up and down. But my friends were doing very well, and they'd started a business at a young age. And I felt I could do it. So my father wouldn't budge. He was a chairman and managing director, and he was very autocratic. So I had to take over. I was fed up with where I was. I was not getting any salary increase. HM were about to. So I came up with this scheme, which I always come up with schemes, like the health club, which we'll come to. But I came up with this scheme that I said to him, it's very simple. These cunning plans are very simple. I said to him that your brothers really feel you should step down because of, you know, the performance of the business and your illness and everything. They feel very strongly, and he would see the writing on the wall that all of his brothers voted him off the board, voted him down, he'd have to go. They all ganged up on him. And then, but there was a completely made up story. And I went to the brothers and said that my father wants to resign, and he wants me to take over. So as they weren't speaking to each other, they never did. They were always arguing, but they never spoke to each other. I thought I'd get away with this. And I did, strangely enough. So, and I could see that exactly where to go, because we were doing very well when we had the jewellery business. It's all about having a good buyer who buys the right jewellery. That's very important. I I don't know about other retail business, but it's all in the product, in the jewellery, and the display and everything. You have to display things and light things very carefully, but there's certain rules that you've got to stick to. But we had this buyer called Terry Jordan, who was brilliant, and he used to buy cheap stuff, and he used to sell it cheap. He didn't use a lot of material, buy a lot of gold and the diamonds and stuff, but he managed to get the price really at a very fantastic level. But my father, of course, who became irrational, had fired him. And I realised the first thing I have to do to get the business, because it's very simple. The business was doing well when Terry Jordan was the buyer and doing very badly when he wasn't, because we'd gone up market and we were expensive and we were suffering. And Terry Jordan by now had left, and he started opening up shops next door to us with a poster saying, compare our prices. And he was like the old Ratners. The manager said, he's wearing our shoes, isn't he? I remember that expression. And he was packed just like we were. So the simple thing was to get him back. But by now he'd become a big shot. He had 26 shots. But I went round to see him, and I offered him, because we're a public company, I said, I'll pay you £4 million for your business. So he couldn't resist that, because he's a very basic sort of guy. The reason that he was a successful buyer, because he had the common touch. He used to go to Butlins for his holidays, and he knew what the public up north, Manchester, Liverpool, what they would want. So people have always like Primark do well today. They always want low prices. It's not a rocket science. So, but I couldn't get the city to place the shares, to raise the £4 million. The idea is you would have a rights issue and issue the shares and get the cash. That's the idea. But we were doing so badly. The shares were down to 27p. Nobody wanted them. So in the end, I gave Terry £2.5 million worth of shares, valued at 27p, and I gave him just a piece of paper, which was an IOU for the other £1.5 million. That's all. It was called a loan note. It's basically a piece of paper. Anyway, those 27p shares went to £4.20. So Terry became quite a wealthy person. He bought loads of houses in Portugal and houses in South Africa and London. He had a beautiful place everywhere. He made millions. Anyway, he came back, and yes, our fortunes started coming back to how they were, but even better, because I then coupled Terry's low price buying with very aggressive marketing, which I'd copied from somebody else. Posters, everything. What Terry didn't do, which I then introduced, was everything was reduced. The manufacturer's recommended price reduced. Everything had a line through it, which everything does today. But in those days, in the 1980s, especially in the jewelry business, nobody was doing it, but the public loved it. And we started taking, big money again. And then H. Samuel, who we were hitting, because the jewelry business isn't that big. If you start doing well, your competitors do badly. H. Samuel we were hitting, I felt I could take them over. But the problem with H. Samuel, like Morrison's today, which is a big attraction, they own their properties, or they owned half of their properties. So I went to the chairman, and he owned over 50% of the business. But I went to him and I said, what about you knew you couldn't buy him. Everyone tried to. All the property guys were buzzing around him, because it was H. Samuel, the biggest jewelers in the country, huge locations, fantastic freehold properties. Everybody wanted them. Could see it was a property play, underperforming, but they had over 50% of the business. But I managed to persuade him to merge with me. So it was a straight merger, and knowing that I was going to fire him. In fact, I went to see a barrister just to check, and he said, don't fire him yet, because this was after we did the merger, because he will sue you to say that you always planned this. Wait for 3 months and say you didn't get on with him, and then fire him. And this is what I did. So I ended up taking the Ratners stores of 150 stores to 600 overnight by buying H. Samuel. And H. Samuel, when we put this merchandise in with the aggressive marketing, because they had much better name than us, better locations, their profits went from 4 million when we bought them to 60 million in a year. I mean, it just absolutely, we were taking more money per square foot than any other retailer. It was just a phenomenal success.
But extraordinary, Gerald, you went after somebody bigger than you. So, I mean, that takes quite a lot of gumption and confidence to say they're bigger than us, but we'll take them. You know, we'll buy them, and then of course you had to persuade him. But that meant you had big vision, big ideas, and you had a lot of you took risk.
Well, I've always taken risks. That's why I spent a lot of time in the betting shop. I mean, risk is what you do in business. It's the thing that gives you the biggest buzz. And a lot of people said to me, yeah, well, I couldn't do what you do because you're prepared to risk everything. Because yes, if you do buy a business 3 times your size and you don't succeed, you're out. Or, you know, when we went to America, our investors would turn on us with venom if we failed there. So, but I love the risk because the rewards are enormous, and there's nothing more exciting. But yeah, I was very ambitious. Always knew H. Samuel, if we bought that, then I'm in the big league. We'd never be in the big league with just Ratners. And that's what I wanted. I mean, I'm a very different person today. But in those days, at the age of 34, I didn't care about anything but being somebody who was running a huge business. Well, I didn't even want the money particularly. I mean, I was earning 850,000 a year, but that was not the big. That was not the thing that excited me. The thing that excited me was making this the biggest jewelers in the world, which I did eventually.
It's interesting when you speak to a lot of successful entrepreneurs. They do say it's not the money that drives you. What the drive is the ambition and to grow something into really, really something big. I've heard also you say that without having the ability to sell, or sales as a trait can hold you back. But if you can sell, you're going to be successful. Full stop. It's
all about selling. That's what business is, selling. I mean, I'm selling now, we're selling on this podcast. When you see investors, you're selling. And that's very important that you're aware of that, because the fact that I worked in the shop behind the counter always made me understand that that's what it's about. The distance between, the jewelry, there's not self-service. You stood behind the counter, and it's that 3-foot distance between you and the customer and what you said to them. And that never changed. And that's why I could relate to the managers when I took over and ran it, because they knew that I knew the business. I'd been there. I'd been in the shop since I was 15. It wasn't until 34. We jumped a lot. I was there for nearly 20 years doing nothing, working in the shops. But I listen and I learn. And that's why you get certain people that come into businesses that don't know. They don't know that particular business. And jewelry is very specialized. You really do have to be, know what you're doing. You don't have to be a jeweler, but you have to know the jewelry trade. And I knew it back to front, 20 years hard labor in there. And people who didn't, because I brought in a financial director when we got big, and he didn't know anything about the jewelry business, and he was useless to me, because, okay, you don't take him on to sell jewelry, but you take him on to be an accountant. And the problem with there's always this joke that they are an anti-profit department, because they try and do everything they can to stop you selling. Don't they understand, by cutting back, making cutbacks in investing, you are not selling, you're doing the opposite. To sell, you have to have a lot of lines. You have to have 5,000 lines in the shops. You have to continually improve the shops, decorate them, light them, make them looking good, invest in the staff, invest in the business. If you're an accountant, like for British Airways, the accountants decided to cut. You used to get 2 pieces of chocolate on the British Airways flight. But some accountant came up and says, we're going to save £70,000 a year if we only give them 1 piece of chocolate. That's typical accountant philosophy. That is negative selling. That was the thin end of the wedge. Then British Airways started cutting this and cutting that. They could see that they were, on paper, they were making savings. And British Airways ended up like EasyJet. They are no longer a premium airline because of accountants cutting. And, that's the problem. British Home Stores, Debenhams, there was nothing wrong with them, those retailers, but they were run by people who asset stripped and cut. and that isn't the way to sell. Selling is throwing money at things.
So you took over. You took over the business. You brought the chap who was successful prior to you taking over. So you got him in, bought his shops. You bought H. Samuel. You were now scaling. You used the city and the market to fund everything. I remember you saying that's the beauty of running a public listed company. You don't actually have to give cash. You just use the instruments and the shares to buy things. So you scaled it. You were now at your height. I'm assuming. What was the sort of valuation at its very, very highest peak?
We were making profits of £125 million, and the profit forecast was 200 million. There isn't any retailer, as far as I know. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So that is like £1 billion profit. There isn't any retailer today that's making £1 billion profit. So it was massive. The valuation was never the P ratio was always on the low side because of the fact that we were issuing shares the whole time we were expanding. And it's a very simple fact that if there's a scarcity of shares, I mean, diamonds, the whole thing is brilliantly controlled by De Beers, who always try and create rarity in diamonds. So there's always a shortage, and that puts the price up. If it wasn't for De Beers, there'd be so many diamonds mined, they'd become worthless, but they control it. What I did by issuing so many shares, the shares were always available, so they didn't go up. They still were, in the early days, they went up more than anyone. They went up, in fact, they were the share of the year. But towards the later days, I was issuing shares to such a degree that, that was holding back and the valuation of the business.
So you used great financial engineering. You matched it with great sales and marketing. You matched it with a vision and an ambition. You are now king of the high street. Now take me to that fateful night.
Yeah, I was just before you get to that, I was voted retailer of the year, the NatWest. So yeah, I was riding high as I was that fateful. It wasn't a night actually; it was a day. But anyway, carry on.
Oh, was it? Okay, sorry. Okay, so take us to that fateful day which marks 30 years. This year marks 30 years of that day.
Yeah.
So just go through that in your own words. What happened?
Yeah, it was me actually who tweeted that it was a 30-year anniversary.
That's right.
And if I hadn't done that, nobody would mention it. And I got something like about 25,000 likes for that.
I was one of them.
Oh, thank you. Well, the reason I did it is because I now use it to my advantage, but to do speeches and mentoring and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, I was invited to do a speech at the Albert Hall. It was quite an honour because there were 6,000 people going, and they would invite the businessman who was like the main, who was doing the best at the time, sort of thing. The person, who was riding on the crest of the wave. So I turn up there at the Albert Hall. The other speaker is President de Klerk, South Africa, President of South Africa, and Norman Lamont, who was the Chancellor. So it was quite, a big thing. And in fact, President de Klerk was saying that he's going to end apartheid, which was quite a big announcement because we hadn't been playing cricket with them for 10 years and stuff, with this boycott, and that was all going to end, and he's announcing that. But that wasn't what made the press the next day. It was me describing a sherry decanter as crap. That was all over the Sun, it was all over the Mirror, which I don't blame them. I blame myself. It was a mistake, but it was a joke to liven up a business speech, but that's the way I was. I was always making those jokes. In fact, I had made those exact jokes before at other speeches, and people found them very funny and took them the way they were. But this was a big event where the press were present, and you, in fact, had to give them a draft of the speech in advance. And the Daily Mirror, it was the Daily Mirror who kicked this off. I know it was all over the Sun, but the Sun, in fact, because I'd got the paper that night, weren't running it, or running it in a very small way. The Mirror were plastering it all over. And when the Sun saw the mirror plastering it. They then copied it and did it all over their paper. But, you know, at the Albert Hall, nobody thought anything of it. I said that, you know, we sell a pair of earrings, same price as a prawn sandwich, 99p, but joke was a sandwich would last longer than the earrings. It was a self-deprecating joke. Would have got away with that one, but then I said that, you know, we sell a sherry decanter. Now, this was an item that we'd acquired when we bought H. Samuel, which I never liked because I actually didn't think much of it because I couldn't believe that it was a silver-plated tray, 6 glasses, and a decanter, all for $12.95. I've always liked beautiful cut glass, and there was now this new sort of glassware coming in from the Far East that was cheap, cast and molded. But you know, so when I'd actually shown a journalist around the Birmingham factory after we built H. Samuel, I showed it to her, and she said, "How can you sell that for so cheap?" Everyone used to say that, "How can you sell it so cheap?" I go, "Because it was ridiculously cheap." And I said, "Because it's crap." That was a joke I made. A lot of retailers, it was like a standing joke, saying that, well, we sell cheap because we cut out the middlemen or we buy in bulk. This was a joke, which nobody expected. And everybody laughed. But the Albert Hall was obviously not the place to do it, and not the time, because we were also in recession. So, you know, it's like the banking crisis. People are looking for fall guys, and I was it. And it was quite horrendous. In fact, it was voted the worst mistake of all time by the Sun.
But you didn't think at the, but you didn't think, as you walked down the steps having delivered this speech, you thought nothing of it because you delivered this line before. Absolutely
nothing of it. Everybody laughed and clapped. I thought it was a great speech. And in fact, in that speech, you know, I talked about the quality of I said, we succeed because we sell high quality products sold by high quality staff. That was the actual line. You can see it online. It's on YouTube. But yeah, I shouldn't have said it. The Daily Mirror journalist came up and said, "Aren't you making fun of your customers?" Then for the first time, I thought a bit worried. But then I thought, no big deal. That'll appear on page 15 of the Daily Mirror, some little column. No idea that it would have the coverage that it had and that we'd be talking about it 30 years later.
It's interesting. There's a comment by the CEO, Walsh, no, I forget his name now, who said when he was cancelling his flights on Ryanair, and he said, "Well, my prices are so cheap." He said, "I can cancel them anytime I want, and if you don't like it, go and catch something else." But nobody said anything because he just said, "That's just the way it is." But it was interesting what happened to you. So what happened next then? So
well, can I just,
the media went crazy.
Yeah, let me just pick you up on that. You referred to Michael O'Leary, the chief executive.
Yeah, Michael O'Leary. Sorry, the name escaped me.
And the thing about Michael O'Leary, nobody's going to boycott Ryanair if he's offering the cheapest flights, because you don't really care as long as you get to there. You'll go on the cheap. And in fact, what he says, like, you know, we're going to charge people to go to the lavatory and all those jokes and insulting people, it all builds to the fact that Ryanair's got the reputation for being ridiculously cheap, no frills. This is what he wants to do. But the jewelry is exactly the opposite. Nobody's going to get down on the knee after they've heard, you know, if I was chairman of Ryanair and I said it was crap, we'd still be in business, not a problem. It was because it was jewelry. So what happened after that was that the press, you know, wrote about it in a big way. And you know what it's like with these stories, they don't go away. The Sun then 3 days later put a picture of my house on the front page saying this was the house that Crap built. It was a beautiful house on the river and stuff like that. And that I like making fun of my customers. And, you know, they built this whole thing about me being like an arrogant snob that makes fun of people. It's just, anybody who knew me, I come from, you know, quite modest background, and I'm not like that in any way. I never have been. But anyway, that's a lot of people that are painted in the press are not what they are. But there's no point in blaming the press. You know, we get the press we deserve. So yeah, they were writing about it. Sales started going down, and I thought, are they going to go down any more? I took the view that because we were running about 10% down a week afterwards, that it would start recovering. You know, that the story would fade, and that it would fade from people's minds, and we would start going back to how we were. But the opposite was true. It built and built and built. No social media, but word of mouth. And then I went on the Terry Wogan show, which was a mistake because I basically informed the 50% of the population that hadn't even heard the story. I was spreading it.
Right.
So, and it got worse and worse. And then the worst thing was it then became, people then realized that I owned H. Samuel as well, and that I owned Ernest Jones and Lizzie Davis and Watch of Switzerland. And they started going from one shop to the next, trying to avoid a Ratner's store and asking for refunds and stuff like that. And instead of making the £200 million profit that year, we lost 100 million.
Wow. Wow. And how did you feel? What was going through your mind?
I was
How can we, you know, I mean, it's a pure crisis, isn't it?
I mean, Gareth Southgate said that his stomach was being ripped out. He felt his stomach had been ripped out after the penalties. And that was actually quite a good description, because that's exactly how I felt. I described it as daggers going into my stomach. But yeah, that's exactly it. It's undescribable. I know nobody's dying, all that, God forbid. But it was something that I'd worked very hard since I was been in the business since a kid. It was my life. It was not healthy, you know, you should have other interests, but I had, all I could care about was, because I've been through all these bad times with my father and stuff and going backwards, and it was a wonderful feeling to turn it round, and nobody could believe that we could have succeeded so much, and then being the only retailer really to go to America and succeed. It was just phenomenal, and it was all thrown away through a stupid joke. So it was unbearable pain. And, I remember lying in bed, 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, in a sweat, thinking, what the hell have I done? How could I do this? I've wrecked everything that I've always wanted. So it was as bad as it gets.
And so what happened next then? So you've obviously got staff who must have been worried about what was going on.
The worst thing you can do in these situations is listen to people's advice. And I was advised, I'm chairman and chief executive, to bring on a chairman, distance me from the business, so he could be the face of it. But of course he fired me. Just like I fired the chairman of H. Samuel. So you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So he fired me, and it was, in a way, he put me out of my misery a bit, you know, like a dog being put to sleep. So I went home, and I didn't get out. I didn't leave my home for 7 years. I lay in bed watching TV.
Wow.
Yeah, I was in a desperate, bad place, miserable. Wallowing in my grief, which is the worst thing you can do.
That's a long time.
Yeah, and it felt like even longer.
And then, so how did you stay sane? I mean, that's a long time, Joe.
I didn't stay sane. I went off my rocker. I was prescribed Prozac. Prozac. I was going to say Viagra, but that wasn't. I was prescribed Prozac, and that didn't help, because although I felt a bit better, it didn't get me back. That's why I think it did go on for 7 years, because I'd given up. The Prozac makes you feel, I'm not saying it's good for, you know, maybe it works for some people, but for me, it just put me more into a shell, you know. I was happier with my situation, which was not a good thing, because you needed to go back out there. And it wasn't until I gave that up and started cycling to pass the time, basically, that I got I started thinking clearly through the exercise, and I could see it was brilliant. I'd never done all this exercise, but I was feeling good at the end of it for the first time. You know, when you really feel bad for a long, long time, and then you start feeling good, it's incredible. Somebody who's like got no money and then they suddenly get money, that is much more exciting for them than somebody who's always had money. So I then thought of the benefits of exercise. I could see this. I mean, I know that everyone now talks about nothing else, but this is 1997, and we weren't all exercise mad like we were today. That was. So I thought I'd open up a health club.
So just before we jump to the health club, what did your wife think of all of this? You being at home, 7.
She said to me that unless I get out and get a job, she's going to throw me out. Which was ironic because my first wife threw me out because I was never at home, and he was throwing me out because I was always at home. But there you go. So she was fed up, absolutely fed up with me. Not only the fact I had no money, but the fact I was in the house the whole time.
So had she been not there, maybe you might not have had. Sometimes it's that support structure around you that can get you through.
If she wasn't there, I'd probably still be there. So yeah, she threatened to kick me out. So I did. So that and the fact that I was cycling made me think, I've got to go back. I've got to do something. I was unemployable, according to the press. They keep reminding me that I'm unemployable. Because they weren't. This is now 7 years after the event, and they were still using me as an example of somebody who was bad in business and who was a villain. I was a poster boy for failure. Every time somebody had screwed up, they said, "Oh, it's a bit like Ratner," and stuff like that. It's just endless bad publicity. So I didn't have any money. I was absolutely skint. But I found a site in Henley, near where I live, and I couldn't buy the property, which was £750,000, but I put it in solicitors' hands. And I'd realised you can put things, I don't know what the rules are today, but you can say to somebody, I'm going to buy this property, put it in solicitors' hands, even though you've got no hope of completing the deal. You've got no money to complete it. Nobody asks you. If you buy a house tomorrow for £50 million, you instruct your solicitor, you could be living in a council flat. I'm going to buy that £50 million. And you've got a month or two to exchange contracts. Anyone can do it, presumably. So this is what I did. So once I had it in solicitor's hand, I thought, oh, good, it's mine. As far as anyone else is concerned, I've got it in solicitor's hands. I'm about to buy it, even though I had no money. So I started telling everyone, it's opening, and I put an advert in the Henley Standard saying it's going to be opening, and I put a drawing of how it's going to look, and which was completely made up, and I then offered. Well, actually, I got somebody who actually drew a really wonderful picture of how something would look when it was finished. So I started selling it, selling membership before I'd exchanged contracts. And on the back of the fact that I am well known, everybody knew about it in Henley. I mean, basically, health clubs, they're all pretty similar. So the big thing is getting people to notice you. I mean, in a way, business is about that. Shops, retail's like that. Everything is getting people, I always go back. If you look at my Wikipedia entry, it says that I used to be taken down by my father to Petticoat Lane, and I used to notice the people who shouted the loudest, and the stores got the most customers, and nothing has changed. There's nothing sophisticated about it. All these management consultants and all this sort of business speak, it's all bollocks. It's all about shouting the loudest. And so with the health club, it's the more people that knew that health club. And everyone, not only did everyone in Henley know it was opening, there was a BBC hours programme, Trouble at the Top, about it. So that was a free advert. So I could beginning to see that the speech I did there was some benefit out of it, because the notoriety made you, you could turn a negative into a positive. So anyway, I got 850 people to sign up for this club that I didn't know in this building. And then when I got the direct debits, then of course I could raise the money because everybody could see that I'd already had a whole load of members and they wanted the club in Henley, so there was no risk involved. I still had a lot of banks turn me down, even with that. But funnily enough, one of the bank managers, his wife had joined. So sometimes you need a bit of luck. And I think that he was the one that actually lent me the money.
Wow. And then off you went, entrepreneur born again, into a totally different industry. And then you sold it?
I sold it 2.5 years later for £4 million.
Wow.
Cash. And when I didn't even have to pay any tax on that because I'd lost so much money on my shares in Ratner. So it was brilliant. I went on holiday and went skiing, and it was a wonderful feeling. And I then didn't want to go back to the situation of staying at home again, because I knew that it antagonized my wife. So I decided the internet jewellery, I could grow the business quite quickly doing that way at the turn of the century. So I then put half the money back into a venture, selling jewellery online, which became very successful, and we took that to about £25 million worth of sales.
So let me stop you there just for a second. Anybody in your position would have been tempted to go bricks and mortar. Anybody in your, having done what you did, having grown the family business, but you went down the e-commerce. And that was at the early, from what you just saying, that was very much the early stage. So what was the logic behind that in your mind?
Because I knew that I couldn't replicate what I had, from scratch again, because it takes the Ratners business, by my father building it up, took years to get me into a situation. I would never have been able to buy HM if it wasn't my father building up the business in the first place. You've got to have a vehicle to make a takeover bid, and to build those shops organically in 2001. It takes years. Nobody's going to build a business organically in 5 years even. So I'd buy, I was looking at a shop in Reading as my first shop, and I thought, I'm not going to have one shop and then open a second, go through all that. And then I saw the internet. I thought, the internet, you are already having 1 million shops. You're hitting everybody in the whole world instantly. You've got a shop in every town in the world, in the country at least. Well, actually, it wasn't the world because we only sold to the UK. But anyway, immediately, the thing that appealed to me is that I would have a shop in every town straight away. That's the sort of thing that I like. I don't like one shop. So, but the problem was that nobody was buying anything on the internet in 2001. So,
and how long did it take before you started to say, well, before you thought this was a good decision? I mean, that must have been, like you said, 2001 was early days. It
did take, it's suddenly around 2003, 2004, after struggling, our sales went mad, started going up enormously. But then it became very easy to drive sales at that time, because it got very cheap to get onto Google, pay-per-clicks, because there was nobody selling jewelry online. So there was no competition for words. But then suddenly everybody realized, the internet's a panacea. And those words became ridiculously expensive. So in the end, our marketing costs, instead of 3%, became 25%. So our prices couldn't be so competitive. We started suffering. And at that point, I started doing more public speaking, because I could see that people said to me, you've got quite a story here.
Yeah.
Ups and downs and all that sort of stuff. And I was invited to do speeches, but I didn't realize that this is my stupidity. I didn't even realize you got paid for them. So I was doing these speeches, and I started having conversations with other speakers, and they were being paid. I couldn't believe the amount they were being paid. They said, how much are you getting? I said, nothing. They said, well, I'm getting £11,000. I said, what? And I thought, God, this is the best business in the world. It's 100% profit. And I love it. I love listening to my own voice. And I started doing it. And at one stage, I was turning over £500,000 in speeches.
Wow.
It was the most incredible. And it was a business that I loved, because I was learning. I was traveling around other businesses, chatting to people. It was perfectly tailored to somebody like me, who is a bit of an extrovert who likes making people laugh, because obviously that's how I got into trouble in the first place. And I loved it. I absolutely love it. And I still love it. And I've been deprived of it this year. And I really am upset about that. But then in the last week, I've now started getting bookings again. That is a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I heard you speak, gosh, in Birmingham. Must be 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember when it was. But you were brilliant. And I've remembered you. And then I think your tweet set me off. And then I've heard you in a couple of other places. And I thought, I've got to get this chap, both in my magazine, The Business Influencer, but also in the podcast. So let me now just ask a few questions along that journey. You talked about the importance of listening. You talked about understanding human behavior. So when you were recruiting, or if you were to recruit today, what would be more important, IQ or EQ, the emotion of people and what their emotional state and how they look at emotion? What are the sort of the key traits you would look for if you were employing someone today?
Well, somebody said to me that they were running, he runs a restaurant actually.
Okay.
He was saying to me that he would rather promote somebody who had worked in the kitchen, washing up dishes, putting the dustbins out at 2 o'clock in the morning when the restaurant closed, had built his way up from there, or her, than bring in some university graduate at a high salary, at an older age, and for them to come in an executive position. So this is what I don't understand about business today. You get people coming in, running businesses, coming right at the top, that have never been a manager or an area manager or a sales assistant. I always feel you get some of them, obviously, but you get a lot that are not, that have come in from university thinking that they know everything, don't have the work ethic that the person who put the dustbins out at 2 o'clock in the morning. So I've always tried to get people to start at the bottom, like I did, work their way up. And that way, when they get to the top, they can look at the workers down below, they can look them in the face, and those people will have respect for them because they know that they did exactly what they're not a different breed, and that they can achieve what that person can achieve. So I like people, I like to bring in people who haven't been necessarily to university, not graduates, who are prepared to, do really basic stuff. And I think it's a good way to start. I've got a friend of mine who's a multi-millionaire, and his son wants a job, and he phoned up his friend who owns a huge building company, and he says, I want you to give my son a job. He said, well, what do you want me to do? He says, just he can climb up the scaffolding or something like that. Something as basic as you can, because that'll hold him in good stead. But if you put him in an office with a swivel chair and a secretary, it'll be a waste of space. He's got to start at the bottom. And, I'm a great advocate for that. I think people who have done that are much better equipped when they get to the top.
At the moment, there's, just as we're coming out of COVID, people are questioning mental health. You spoke about your 7 years. What did you learn about yourself during those 7 years? And it is about a mind shifter, but you managed to overcome that. So what lessons did you learn, and what did you learn about yourself going through those 7 years and then seeing yourself rise up to such a brilliant level again?
I learned that by wallowing in your own grief and being self-pitying and telling everybody how unlucky you are makes it even worse. People don't sympathize. When you listen to a Radio 5 phone-in and somebody's saying what a terrible life they've got, it doesn't actually get them anywhere. Everybody's saying, oh, well, you're really unlucky and all that sort of stuff. In fact, and once the phone call's finished, they put the phone down, that's the end of it. And they think, oh, well, somebody who's not got a very good life. So it's no point in doing any of that. And I found that, yes, you know, we all suffer from mental health. You know, I suffered from mental health for a very good reason, because I didn't have any money and I had debt and I was humiliated and I'd lost everything. So these things do generate depression. There's no question, you know, but there are people that suffer from depression who don't have all those problems. And in fact, today I don't have it, financial problems, but I have bad days like everybody else. And I don't know why, you know, some days. But what I do find is that if I exercise, go for a long walk or cycle, it doesn't have to be, I don't have to do cartwheels or lift ridiculous weights or anything like that. But if I do exercise, suddenly feel a million times better. You know, my wife might give me a hard time because, you know, I haven't done that job, or I'm, you know, I've made a mess of the floor or something, which I'm always doing. And I, you know, think, oh God, life's miserable. But then I go out on my bike and I come back and I'm a different man. So I've learned, you know, that exercise, and I didn't do exercise that much when I was running around because I didn't have time. But if you can make time for it, and you should make time for it, is the most important thing that I can recommend to fight mental health. It's the one thing, you know, you get your endorphins going. You think clearly, you know, if you're sort of in a board meeting and people are firing questions at you, you need to impress, and you quickly, when you're under pressure like that, you don't actually think clearly or come up with solutions. When I go on my bike, I solve my problems. I get my best ideas. I don't do that when I'm in my office or anything like that. So I love exercise, and you know, I'm 71. I cycle 25 miles every day. Today I was in London. I went to see an exhibition of paintings. I got back to Maidenhead. The connecting train was not there. So I walked the hour and 20 minutes to my thing, and loved it. And then I walked the dog when I got back. So, you know, exercise has saved me, you know, and during the pandemic, I would think I'd go completely mad, because I'm a social animal, and I've got a routine of doing a lot of exercise to, you know, get through certain days. I'm in the office during the week, but weekends and stuff like that, you know, if you're not seeing people, you weren't being able to see people earlier in the year, you know, I'd go mad. So I did, you know, I would do exercise then. I would go for long walks, listening to, I don't listen to podcasts like everybody else, but I listen to sort of drama on sounds and stuff like that. So which I would never listen, if I'm going on my walk, I'll never listen to any current affairs or anything about the pandemic or any news items or any documentaries. I would listen to something based in the 14th century, because you get completely carried away by that. You know, you get total escapism, which is what you want to do when you want to go for a walk. You want to escape your normal life. You don't want to keep being reminded of it.
Yeah, I prefer dance music myself. When I want to relax, I listen to dance
music. I love music. I listen to music on my bike. I listen to the spoken word when I walk. Don't know why, but that's the way it is.
Just a couple of questions that we're going to try and wrap up. I was going to ask you, what's your worst decision? We know what that is. So what about your best ever decision that you think, thank God I made that decision? Just out of curiosity, what's your best decision then?
It's two. It's one that I decided to buy H. Samuel, because that put me in the big league, albeit I didn't stay in it. And two is that I started to start doing speeches. And that came about actually because I wanted to publicize Gerald my online jewellery business. So I went, phoned up I realised the only thing anybody's interested about me is the speech. So I emailed the Albert Hall, the chief executive of the Institute of Directors. I said, why don't you have me back in 2003? Because I wanted to say what I was doing now and promote my business, which he did. And that's how it got me back onto the speaker circuit. So the decision, the best decision apart from H. Samuel, was actually to go back to the Albert Hall, go back to the scene of the crime, not avoid it. That was my best decision, strangely enough. And, you know, as I say now, that I lost everything through that speech. And it's ironic that I now make a living out of it.
Two last questions. One is, as I said, you were the king of the high street. Where is the high street going? Does it have a future?
No, I can't see that it does, because I was in Oxford Street today. Half the shops are closed. So how can anybody, you know, I know that even when I did well when I had shops around me that were busy. I'd love to be, but next door, I mean, at the time, Next were doing very well. And I remember when they opened up next to us in Kensington High Street, our sales, I phoned up the manager and said, why have our sales gone up so much? He said, because Next have opened next door. I never hadn't heard of them. It was one of their first shops, but they said they're packed out. So you rely on your neighbours. That's why I'm always against charity shops, because I don't think they draw people to the high street, and they've allowed to be in there paying no rate and stuff like that. So it's proliferated them. It hasn't done the high street way before the pandemic. I think the pandemic has speeded up the demise of the high street. If you look at now, younger people, they live on their phones. I don't say it's a good thing. I think it's a bad thing, but that is the way it is. People are just preferring buying online. And I just think that there's too many, if you look at it actually, there's more retail space today than there was before the internet started. So how does that work? It's just, there's just too much of it. So I think the high street will go. I think it should be turned to residential. And I said that in the Mail on Sunday 2 years ago, before anybody else did. And I think that there will be some shops, but there will be far, you know, probably the high street will disappear. You might have some shopping malls or out of town, but there'll be far, far less shops. The water's got to reach its own level. And at the moment, there's just too much space out there.
It was interesting. I was reading in the papers over the weekend that 38 shopping malls had been sold in the first half of the year for about 500 million, which is nothing.
Nothing.
Think about.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing. Another 316 million were under offer, and of 29 centres, half the shops were empty. So they seem to be following what your observations are.
I remember, you know, we had a shop in Croydon Whitgift Centre. We sold 1,000 earrings, I remember, in one day. I went down there. It was like a football crowd. You could not move. It was before Christmas, yeah. It was heaving. People were queuing. Those days have gone, sadly. People are not, you know, people are not out and about.
And that's it. And so,
yeah.
Do you encourage everyone to go digital then?
Not encouraging anybody to do anything, but I just think that that is the way it's going. Well, I don't try and influence anybody. What I try and do is see where people are going, and I go there to try and make money. So I just follow the trends, and the trend is that everybody is on their phones, and the phone is becoming more and more. It's becoming easier and easier to order stuff. Amazon started all that, really. And I think that, I mean, I think it will go 80% online, 20% bricks and mortar in about 5 years' time. I think that's the way it'll end up. Is it a good thing? No. I think it's better that people are out and about. They go shopping. They will go to coffee bars. They'll have a sandwich. They'll meet some friends. I mean, it was a big thing. I was taken by my mother on a Saturday afternoon to the local department stores, and it was a day out. What is the pleasure of tapping something out on a phone, and it's all done in a second? You made the shopping experience, I don't like using these words, shopping experience, and somebody's using now their journey, shopping, what do they call it? Their journey It's not. Why can't you just buy something? Why do you have to go on a journey? You know. But it is a fact that although you never know with forecasts, because somebody once said that when the Japanese produced the chip, that the Swiss watch industry would die because it was much more accurate than the moving parts. Yet it was the best thing that ever happened to the Swiss watch industry. There was no reason for them to continue because there was no accuracy. You could buy a chip, buy a watch from a petrol station for £5, which was better than a Rolex, more accurate than a Rolex. But they turned their watches into jewellery. Somebody, I know this is a ridiculous example, but they said that the whole of London in the Victorian times would sink in manure because there were so many horse and carts. They didn't know there was going to be the car that's going to go. So nobody knows for sure. We're all making predictions based on the past. And the past is never a good form guide for the future.
Yeah.
If you look at a horse and you look at its form and it's won the last 4 races, then you say, I'm going to back it. It then doesn't win the 5th race. It's not as easy as that. Life is not as easy as that. Business is not as easy. So nobody knows is the answer, especially not me.
2 very short questions before we finish. You said it looks like going forward, so I'm thinking of new entrepreneurs, 80-20 probably dictated by e-commerce. So would you say to anyone, if you're looking to start something up, you really want to be looking at something with a digital sort of aspect to it? Probably.
Not necessarily. In fact, there's a lot to be said for doing something that is unfashionable, that not everybody and their dog are doing. I don't think that it makes sense to just say, well, digital is booming, that's where it is, everything is now, we'll go down that road. I think the key is to be good at something, and to do it better than your competitor. I've always liked to do a business where, in fact, not everybody is doing that. When I did the health club business, there weren't a lot of health clubs in 1997. When I went on the internet at the turn of the century, everybody said, don't go near it. Nobody's going to buy anything it's a business-to-business vehicle. We just had the .com bubble burst. It's not the time. So I always like to do things when they're unfashionable, to not follow the crowd. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that people do the obvious.
Well, I hope you're right, because obviously we've just launched a magazine, The Business Influence, and everybody said you're crazy doing a physical magazine. It's digital as well. But so far the reaction's good, so I hope you're right. Last question then, Gerald, before I let you go. Best 3 tips you would give to today's entrepreneur? With an amazing journey you've had, what 3 tips would you give to entrepreneurs?
Well, I think don't play by the rules. Don't follow the script. Do what you want to do. You don't have to do the normal type of approach to business. In fact, if you do that, you will fail, because most businesses do fail. So the one that succeeds is the one that's a bit off the wall, who does something totally different, breaks the rules. Rules are there to be broken. And if you break the rules and you don't worry about how you do it, then but you make up your mind that you do want to do it, and nothing will stop you. This is not a very good example, but I had to do a speech last year in Portsmouth, and the road was blocked. But I had to get to this hotel. That's my view. If I'm doing a speech, I have to be there. So I drove all the way down the lay-by on the motorway, completely illegal, but I got there on time. I didn't care what the consequences were. And there's a little bit like that in business. You have to, you can't let anybody get in your way. You have to achieve that. And I do think that business is something that people say, well, you've got a vision and just do it. But there's a lot of detail and little boring bits on the way. I was at a Wallace collection in London today looking at a Canaletto painting. The artist had a vision, but he introduced a tremendous amount of detail. All the buildings were perfectly formed. There were people on the Grand Canal in Venice rowing the boats. You saw their muscles, the people, there was so much incredible detail, and business is like that. You have to get all the detail right. So yeah, don't follow the script. Be an expert in terms of getting your business right. And then finally, like me, don't give up, because you will be turned down. My nephew was turned down for a job today, and he was very upset. I said, "How many times have you been turned down?" He says, "This is it. I've turned down 6 times in a row." I said, "Well, that's quite good actually, because on average it means that people get turned down 8 times before they get a job. So you only got 2 to go. Your failure is the route to success." And it is a bit like that. You have to fail to succeed.
Gerald, just some of the things, and just add me if I forget anything. So some brilliant stuff here. So you explained how difficult or easy it is to be in a family business, how you learned from very, very, very young, and how that experience was better than having a high IQ because of school or college or university. You spoke about how to use finance to grow, the importance of listening to people, really listening, being empathetic, big vision. You were really ambitious. You were driven by that big vision. The importance of brand. You spoke about, if you shout loud, then people will notice. I love the example of the person who shouts at the stall. And of course, you talked about at times, if you can copy what other people are doing, that makes, that can help you. And you spoke about, sometimes if you've got to grow your brand, look at all the tools. I mean, today it's social media, but in those times it was speaking. And I think that was really interesting. You've given views on where you think retail is going. And again, you've given views on, if you're an entrepreneur, the role that you should now be looking to do, and the kind of tips that you gave were fantastic. Don't follow everybody else. Look at detail, be an expert. And above all, and this I can definitely say it is right for you, you don't give up. And I think you'll go down in history as someone who's seen completely A to Z of what running a business is. And it's been fascinating. And something I've heard you a million times, didn't detract from the fact of listening to your story again. So compelling. And so much we can learn from what you've done. So thank you very much again for your time. Thank you for devoting the evening, well, it's now evening, and telling your story. An amazing journey it is, and thank you very much for your time.
Jinder, thank you so much for those kind words. Much appreciated.